All right, so we have external factors that influence the newly forming United States as well. We've talked about the internal factors. Now let's look at some of these external factors. So some of these are going to be your Native Americans. We put them as external because they are not part of the United States. And what happens is we have another population boom in the United States from 1770 to 1790. If we look at that peace treaty of 1783, it completely left out Native Americans and yielded all of that land to the United States. So with that population boom, we have nearly 4 million people to put pressure on the areas of the Shawnee, the Delaware, and the Miami Indians. The U.S. Army entered into the western half of Ohio, a lot because people were moving there. I talked last week about one of my great grandfathers way back in there who served, and he bought additional land grants, and then he ended up settling in Kentucky with those land grants that he had. So you get this where people are moving into the Ohio Valley area, and it does start putting those pressures. Fort Washington, which is now kind of modern day Cincinnati area, is where they kind of started at. As they marched west, they burned Indian villages. Indians retaliated, killing and wounding about 55% of the Americans in the region. So one of the things that Washington does, he doubles the military in the area. So you've got your Native American influences going on there. We also have some more external conflicts, and that Britain or France are going at it again. The French Revolution puts some pressure on the United States for a couple reasons. And the French Revolution happens because of a combination of factors, which are economic, social, and political kind of crises that kind of drive them to this. In 1793, Britain and France go to war again, and the problem comes down to who does the United States support. You have to stop and look at this two directions. One, the French came to aid during the American Revolution when we were declaring independence from Britain. But then how do you go against England when many U.S. citizens still have family and friends in England and are still very loyal? I mean, in a lot of aspects, they're still going to look at this and say that is their home. In 1793, Washington passed the Neutrality Proclamation, and it contained friendly assurances to both sides. And the goal was to stay out of the war, but American ships continued to trade between the French West Indies and France. So the British captured more than 300 of the vessels where they're trading, and so something needs to happen. So we have the Jay Treaty. So the Jay Treaty, Washington sends John Jay to England to negotiate. He was supposed to secure trade with the English West Indies. He's also supposed to secure the American vessels, and it is absolutely ultimately a failure. So that really does put the United States in a bind of saying, okay, what now? We also have the Haitian Revolution. Now, this one really does influence the United States in a lot of ways, because this is probably really the first successful slave revolt, and it. For a long time, when historians looked at this, they viewed the Haitian Revolution as incredibly unorganized. Especially because mainly your written accounts are going to be from white people, and they downplayed this organization of the African Americans. And they wrote it that it was chaotic, it was just a bunch of random events. But if you really kind of dig in here and look at it, there was a Jamaican planter, Brian Edwards. He stated that the slaves that resisted were unorganized, and he's really who sets this off, and it stays that way for a long time. They were unorganized. But The resistance had leadership, it had organization, and it had a unifying objective. So they all spoke the Creole language. They had a shared religion. It was called Vodun, which is spelled Vodun, and it's built on Caribbean religions and gatherings. So these things kind of pull divided ethnic groups together. So a voodoo priest conducted a meeting in Creole, and he said, and I quote, "There Boukman gave the last instruction, and after voodoo incantations and the sucking of the blood of a pig, he stimulated his followers by a prayer spoken in Creole, which, like so much spoken on such occasion, has remained." And the first uprising took 1 week, took place 1 week later. So this is the first and only successful slave revolt that we see large scale. And it is now what is considered Haiti. And so the colonies there furnished 2/3 of France's overseas trade. They employed 1,000 ships and 15,000 French sailors. They provided a lot of France's riches. It was based on a complete plantation system and was the greatest individual market for the African slave trade. It was a 12-year resistance to obtain human rights that happens here. And so why does this happen in Haiti? In France, you've got the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which was published August 26, 1789, and it says, in the eyes of the law, all citizens are created equal. Another quote, "The aim of all political associations is the preservation of the natural rights of liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression." Now, with the Constitution, with the U.S. Constitution, and you should have read it at this point, you should have noticed things like the 3/5 clause, that it talks directly about men, which now has been interpreted that it's men and female both. But when the French had their revolution, it was that all citizens were equal. French leaders really, obviously, they don't want word of the rights of man getting back to their colonies, because they were exploiting the slaves for profit, and it was a very rewarding business. A couple reasons. I mean, you don't want them to know just out of sheer fear. I mean, fear that they're going to uprise. Another thing is profit. Some French revolutionaries believed in the equality of all, and those French revolutionaries did help spread a more anti-slave message around the island of San Domingo, and they organized meetings to discuss their rights. So they would smuggle these pamphlets that was about the rights of men. They would smuggle them onto ships, and they would spread the word. So they had organized meetings to discuss their rights, mass meetings in the forest at night. They seized arms and they rebelled. They lived together in gangs of hundreds on the huge sugar factories. They formed what was closer to a modern kind of proletariat. It was a class of wage earners in a capitalistic society, and whose only possession of significant material value is their labor power. And that was being a member of a labor class, kind of. So they kind of get together, and they were actually led by a group of mulattoes, which was led by Vincent Ogue. And a mulatto is a mixed blood. And here's the problem that happens in Haiti. If you are of mixed blood, so say you are part African American, part Spanish, they were trying to establish suffrage themselves. So they were considered free in an aspect, but they were considered semi-citizens. So if you were a mulatto, you were a semi-citizen. And they straddled a very tenuous position in the Haitian society. They were repressed by the conservative white power structure that organized them only as being a people of color. They were required to enlist for a mandatory 3-year term in the military. They were forced to arrest fugitive slaves. They were forced to protect travelers. They were forced to collect taxes. They were forced to serve in their local militia without compensation. They were not paid for this. They were also required to provide their own supplies for as long as it was deemed necessary. So they were required to be in the military. They were required to do these jobs, but yet they were not given any of their own supplies. They weren't paid. I'm not sure how they were supposed to come up with these things. They were released from the service if it was deemed that their presence was no longer or that their presence was no longer necessary. They were outlawed from holding office. They were totally excluded from Haitian society, but they were allowed to own land. So think about this. They were never paid for anything they did, but I guess they were allowed to own land. And this was done with the realization that society's restraints on mulattoes made it highly unlikely that they could actually do anything with that land. So they really did. They joined together with the African Americans there, which is, I think, if we had seen like the lower class in the United States, if we had seen them join together with the slaves, probably a successful slave revolt would have happened here. During this revolution, plantations were destroyed, white owners were killed, and hundreds of thousands of lives lost. And slavery was abolished in the colony. The British worked with Spain, being as how they lost the U.S., they decided to seize the opportunity to grab the colony there, the Haitian colony. And the British wanted the slave rebellion in order to protect their own slave colonies, but the British forces were hit with yellow fever, so they weren't even able to take over. So 1803, Haiti proclaimed independence and labeled themselves as a new country. But this really did shape the politics in the late 1790s in the United States. Washington, he did struggle to be above party politics. During his farewell address, he stressed the need to maintain a unity of government. He also warned to steer clear of permanent alliances with a portion of the foreign world, and he printed his farewell address in an open letter, which was published by newspapers. The polarization led to two distinct political groups, that polarization being the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, one wanting a large federal government, one wanting a small federal government with more states' rights. And this led a lot of people to believe that the government was ultimately, that this experimental government was ultimately going to fail. The Federalists supported Britain, their their foreign policy, their commercial interests. And your prominent Federalists are actually going to be people like Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and John Adams. The Republicans, they rooted for liberty in France. They worried about those notions of a monarchy in the United States. They were very prominent Republicans like Thomas Jefferson. And the Haitian Revolution, though, also influenced the United States in a different way as well. It really caused a more racialized divide from what we had seen before, even though it was a very racialized slave system anyways. You want to have those lower class people join with the elites based off of skin tone and some sort of cultural alignment rather than economic. So it creates some harsh laws that will be put on the slaves, and it does cause that lower class to join more with the elites than any other system. So let me know if you've got any questions.